Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, and when I built this pond 2 years ago, I had one goal in mind, and that was to raise big bass. So after the pond build was complete, my plan was to stock it full of bait fish, add the bass, fertilize the pond, and sit back and watch them grow. Seemed pretty simple, but man was I wrong. Pond management can be a little tougher than it looks. We had the emergence of several different types of aquatic vegetation, as well as different filamentous algae that were difficult to get rid of. We also had some extremely dense plankton and zooplankton blooms that threatened the dissolved oxygen in the pond. And at one point, the water cleared up so much we had over 12 feet of visibility. So I quickly learned that having a pond is like playing a game of chess, but I'm always up for a challenge. So we will be talking about some of the successes and failures over the past couple years. And the best way to determine how successful you are at managing a pond is by looking at the growth rates of the bass that live in it. And if the majority of the fish in your pond are nice and thick, then you know you have good water quality and abundance of forage, as well as a good habitat for them to live in. And on the opposite end, if your bass are real skinny, your pond could be overcrowded or not have sufficient forage fish, and you could even have issues with water quality. But years ago, fisheries biologists came up with this term called relative weight. And it's become the new standard, and the process is simple. Whenever a bass reaches a certain length, it should have an expected weight. And if you look at this table here, we have the length on the left side, and let's just say for instance a bass is 15 inches long. That means if you look at that highlighted column, that an average healthy bass would weigh 1.83 pounds. Now, if your bass weighs more than that, then its relative weight will be over 100%, and if it weighs less than that, it'll be less than 100%. So we're going to start back in the beginning, back in 2023, when we first started weighing the fish, and look at some of the relative weights, and we're going to see how our bass stack up. So we first started getting weights and lengths back in the spring of 23, and as you can see with that highlighted column, all of our bass were in real good shape. But there are a couple things to preface about relative weight. So obviously this is going to fluctuate throughout the year with the bass spawn and other factors. But your target range is around 90%. If you have a bass that is 90%, that's a good healthy fish. So anything around that 100% or above is outstanding. But as you can see, we were doing really good in the beginning. That's because the pond had an abundance of bait fish before we ever added the bass. So it was literally like a buffet for them that first year. And as we continue on through 2023, the majority of the relative weights are above 100%. So by looking at this, we'll have to say that first year's weights were above average. But as we were creating this document, I remembered that we weighed and measured Bonnie and Clyde when we added them to the 5-acre pond. So I had to go check out their relative weight. And it was very surprising that Clyde's relative weight was higher than Bonnie's. So when we had them in the aquariums and even the backyard pond, Bonnie was always the bigger bass. Obviously because she was a female, but it turns out Mr. Clyde liked hitting the shiners a little bit more than Bonnie did. So it's really cool to see that even raising fish in an aquarium and a backyard pond, if you feed them enough, those relative weights can exceed 100%. And too bad I didn't get a weight and measurement on the black crappie we call Outlaw. He would have probably shattered some records. And if you guys recall, we also added some Florida strain bass earlier this spring from a different lake, and I knew that the fish in this pond had really good genetics, some very solid fish, and good contributions to this pond. But now I want to start taking a look at some of the fish that we caught multiple times and seeing if we can get a clearer picture of the pond management over the full 2 years. And as you'll see with most of these fish, that first year they're always at or near 100%. But I want you to pay attention to jaws right there in November of 23. And one thing that I suspect has been a failure on my pond management is that's when we stock those rainbow trout. Now, stocking rainbow trout is a very common thing in bass ponds and can result in giant bass because they're a pure protein snack. But one thing I underestimated is how aggressive the rainbow trout were on the forage fish. And I got a first-hand look at it. These trout are vicious. I think the trout hurt the bass by depleting a lot of that forage fish that should have got them through the wintertime. Now, had this pond been 5 years old and the bass were 5 to 7 pounds, even if those trout ate the forage fish and the bass ate the trout, that would have been great. But some of these trout were roughly the same size as the bass, and I think I made a big mistake by adding them that fall. And as we continue to look at this list, it didn't affect all the fish. I think some of the bigger females that continue to eat bluegills were just fine, but you will see a drop off and some of those weights around November of 23. And now I want to look back at some of the bass that had the bigger relative weights and see what they look like. So let's take a look at Copper, 9568. This fish had a relative weight of 129%, and you can always tell by looking at the fish's belly. Some people call them a butterball. They're usually nice and round when they have that high relative weight. So here we have another fish that's been consistently high, and that's Poseidon. And here's a look one of the last times I caught her, the big bulging eyeballs, and just a nice healthy fish, weighing 3.63 pounds in less than 2 years. That's a good growth rate. So overall, looking at these spreadsheets and relative weights, I feel like we've been pretty successful, and I'm happy to see a lot of these numbers, but I saved the best fish for last, and the one with the biggest relative weight overall is a fish we named the goat. And this fish shattered the record for relative weight here in this pond. And we've caught the goat twice. The first time it was 144%, and the second time it was 157, which is a truly exceptional fish. And Daniel Arms caught it the very first time and named it back during the Aquascape pond build. But the interesting detail is, on 11/15 of 23, the goat weighed 3.94 pounds. And less than 3 months later, we caught the goat again, and it weighed 4.71 pounds on February the 3rd. That is wild, because at this point, the goat was only 19 months old. And so it's getting really close to a 3 pound per year growth rate, which is phenomenal. So I can't wait till we catch the goat again and get an updated measurement. But seeing those relative weights on the goat really does make all that hard work we put in worthwhile. But one other thing I want to discuss about the relative weights, and the reason it's so important to track these, is because it is the best indicator of the health of a pond. So for instance, if I start seeing relative weights drop down in the 80% and even 70 percentile, that can mean one of a few different things. First off, the bass could be overcrowded and there's too much competition. It could also mean that there's not enough forage fish. It could also mean poor water quality, things like the low dissolved oxygen, or some imbalances with pH, nutrient loads, and things of that nature. And I've even heard that too much aquatic vegetation will keep a bass pond from reaching that 100 percentile. So a lot of good information comes from this chart, and it's told me that we're doing good in some areas. And one of the things I think some pond owners fail to do is add enough forage food for the fish. And as you guys have seen in our previous videos, we even went outside of the box and looked for some uncommon food like the prawns. So the benefit of the prawns is it's a great protein snack. The one downside is that it's such a small portion of the year, usually about 2 or 3 months in the fall. But it is a good kick that helps them get through the winter. The other really good food source we added to the pond was the tilapia. Again, the baby tilapia won't feed the bass all year long, usually from around June through about January, so 6 or 7 months. But last year the bass fed on the tilapia more than any other bait. And they also help out with algae control, so it's good all around. And the last bait source we'll talk about are threadfin shad, and these are much more complicated than I initially expected. So one mistake I made as a new pond owner, I thought, okay, when you stock 10,000 shad, that's going to feed your bass a long time. Well, I was wrong. So bass will go through 10,000 threadfin shad quick, and a bass has to eat 10 pounds of forage to grow 1 pound. So I quickly learned that when you stock the threadfin shad, you don't want those to get eaten, you want them to multiply, and you want to see 100,000 shad in the pond rather than 10,000, and that's what'll feed these bass throughout the entire year. On a side note, I just realized that means the goat has eaten over 40 pounds of bait fish himself. Probably closer to 50 or 60, which is incredible. Which is why you need a self-sustaining forage fish like the threadfin shad. And so that's where things get complicated. So a threadfin shad's only source of food is phytoplankton. And the only way you're going to get phytoplankton in a pond is to fertilize it. And that led to some other mistakes that we made, especially in our first year. So during our very first winter, once the temps dropped below freezing, our pond water actually got crystal clear, which isn't necessarily a harm, but what that allowed is the sunlight to penetrate all the way to the bottom and allowed filamentous algae to grow throughout the entire pond. So when the next spring rolled around, not knowing any better, I fertilized the pond. And instead of that fertilizer creating a good plankton bloom, all it did was feed all of that filamentous algae. So we had an abundance of algae, no plankton bloom, and what I've since learned from that is that you have to get rid of the algae first before fertilizing. And when it's taken over your whole pond, you can't use chemicals, so the best way to do that is to starve it out with some beneficial bacteria that'll outcompete it for its food source. So this past spring, I learned from my mistake the year prior, and we treated all the algae before fertilizing, and that created a new problem for us. And that's when all that filamentous algae died off. It released an abundance of nutrients into the pond, and so we got that plankton bloom we had been trying to achieve, but it was a thick, really dense bloom that could cause catastrophic issues with your fish. And the quickest way to explain it is that when that phytoplankton dies off, It depletes the dissolved oxygen in the water and could kill every fish in your pond. And there's only one thing that could prevent that from happening, and that's one of these big volcano pumps. So luckily we were able to install that and provide plenty of oxygen for the fish. And then we also had a zooplankton take over, which feed on the phytoplankton, and it looks a lot more concerning than it is because all the water turns brown, but that's actually just a natural part of the process of a fertile pond. And when we're talking about pond management, the other thing that every pond owner has to deal with is vegetation or algae, and like I've mentioned, it's better to treat all of that, starve it out, and address it before those issues get out of hand. So overall, I feel like we've done a decent job on the 5-acre pond. I absolutely made some mistakes, had some growing pains, learned a lot of new things throughout the process with the help of several biologists and just hours out there on the pond. We all know that dogs are a man's best friend, so today we're on a mission to help you feed your pup top quality, healthy food. Sundays for Dogs is a fresh dog food made from a short list of ingredients, including 90% meat, 10% vegetables, and 0% synthetic nutrients. So today, we've got Covey out here at the farm enjoying a nice bowl of Sundays on the dock before she goes for a swim. It's the beef flavor, and it looks and smells just like beef jerky. And since Sundays puts all their dog food through an air drying process to preserve the flavor and nutrition, it doesn't require refrigeration or preparation, just pour and serve. And I know that many of you have picky pups when it comes to food, but every dog I've seen try it has loved it. It's made with high quality ingredients like beef, chicken, turkey, pumpkin, and premium fish oils, so it's full of flavor. They've also designed the bag with a Velcro seal that makes it very easy to store away and keeps it fresh. And Sundays was founded and ran by a veterinarian that spent years getting the recipe dialed in, and they ship it directly to your door. So if you're interested in trying them out, go to sundaysfordogs.com/BamaBass, and you can get 50% off your first order. So go check out Sundays for Dogs, and let's keep them pups happy and healthy, folks. Alright, so I got some really exciting news. If you saw in one of our previous videos, Johnny and June spawned in Cedar Falls, and if you'll notice, one of their bass fry was hanging out with some of the golden shiners, and look who is all grown up now. Man, he has gotten big quick, which tells me a couple things. The first thing it tells me is this fish is definitely a female, because it is absolutely outgrown Truman and Houdini up there in the wetland filter. And man, I'm blown away. That is some rapid growth. Because keep in mind, this spring, this fish was just a little fry. It was one of these guys swimming around right here in this pack. And there may be a few more of them in the pond that I haven't seen. They're probably hiding until they get a little bigger like this little guy. But he likes to hang out right there in the middle of the pack. But here's a good underwater shot of him getting chased around by the tilapia. And look at there, nice big belly. It even has a scar on its back. Makes me wonder if a bird tried to get him at one point. But alright, we have to do it now. So we've named every fish in this pond, and we're going to need a name for this one. I'm excited because it is the very first fish that's ever hatched in one of our backyard ponds. So I need you guys to leave me a female bass name down in the comment section below. She's even as big as the bluegill now. Alright, something else that got me really excited is I was out here on the dock, and when I looked down, I saw thousands of newly hatched threadfin shad. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, we don't want to just have those 10,000 shad that we added to the pond. It's important that we have that shad spawn, and even more important that we have that plankton bloom. And literally everywhere I look around this dock, there are thousands of tiny threadfin shad. And you can even see they're up there feeding on that plankton right there at the surface. And I think we may be getting close to finally having a self-sustaining food source. Man, I love to see that, and I know the bass do too. I'm even starting to see some of the little guys down there chasing them around. And speaking of food source, there's baby tilapia cruising the banks all around the pond. Here's a really good look at some of them. You can see them feeding there along the pond bottom, probably eating some algae. So these tilapia are the perfect size, and when the bass start feeding on these, it gives those 3-inch bluegill a break and allows them to get bigger and become adults and reproduce more. So these tilapia play a big role throughout the fall and winter each year. Alright, got a fish delivery coming here shortly, so before they get here I want to sink some treetops, because if there's one thing I've learned this year, it's more important to keep those adult threadfin shad alive, because every shad that survives could produce 2 or 3 or 5,000 more shad. So by sinking some of these treetops, it's gonna give them a place to hide out long enough so they can spawn. And this time of year, the shad prefer the deep water because it's nice and cool. So we're gonna sink some tops out here in this deep stuff. Just lay your brick out with a piece of wire in between it, stack your trees on top, and tie it up. All right, we got a little storm about to roll in, but there's a really good point of reference. You can see that these tops are longer than the boat that I'm using to put them out. And so all the fish are going to benefit from having these. All right, we're going to go ahead and dump these off right here around one of the diffusers. And that block doing its job and getting everything sunk. And today, rather than doing multiple small piles, I decided to go with some big chunks. And we got another one sunk. Right over here in the deep water by the drain pipe. Man, nothing looks more refreshing than this volcano pump when it's 95 degrees outside. Alright, now it's time to go check in on the fish in Cedar Falls, see how everybody's doing. One thing I love about these fish is they're very friendly. Johnny and June and the bluegills, wherever I'm hanging out around the pond, they'll come up to me and greet me. You can see they're even in this shallow water that's probably only about 6 inches deep right here at the intake bay. And one reason they like me so much is because I like to feed them. Today we got some crickets and worms. We're going to be dropping a few of them in there. Oh man, I love that shot. Look at that. A little dueling bluegill action chasing a cricket. Alright, we're going to try some worms. Looks like we just had a little battle there. And the bluegill ended up winning that one. Now we're going to try a flurry of crickets and see if we can get some big blow-ups. Which one's brave enough to hop off the lily pads? Oh, he's making a run for it. They're not going to last long. Got him. Oh, this guy, he's heading in the right direction at least. Oh, I think he's going to make it. Yep, we had a survivor. Another worm dropping in. There's Tiger. Finally got him one. And Johnny got one, and the bluegill got the other. One last little cricket. Making a run for it. Didn't work out. Oh, check that out. One of the crickets landed up there in the Victorian lily. And I think he's safe if he'll stay put. Got him. Man, there's some good topwater blow up. Alright, another week at the pond. Another couple thousand golden shiners. Got some big guys and some little guys. Gonna mix them up. Man, there's some jumbos in there today. We'll put them all in this pond and end up taking some of them out and going over there and feeding them to the bass off the dock this afternoon. But got to get them acclimated real quick and get them in. So every time I drop them in to acclimate them, we got some interested bass. There's Tiger right there, the one that we had in the 300-gallon aquarium. Almost let me touch him. But the bass held off on the crickets and worms because they knew the shiners were coming. I always like to step over here by the waterfall area and get them stirred up. Now we're getting to see some good action. Alright, so here's one that I was not so excited to see, and that's this snake hanging out up under Sarah's Jeep. And I'm going to need some help from you guys identifying it, but I have a feeling that this is one of the first venomous snakes we've seen out here at the farm. You guys let me know if it is what I think it is. It looks like bad news to me. And while we're on the snake topic, we've had this one hanging out in the pond for quite some time now. Pretty sure it's the harmless water snake, but it is getting pretty big. You can see it's gotten a lot bigger in the waist area. I have a feeling it may be putting some of them shiners down. And now we're up here at the wetland filter, one of my favorite spots on Cedar Falls. We got two little guys hanging out in here. They know it's feeding time. They're ready to go. There's one. There's the other. Thinking about making a jump. He said, nah, just kidding. We're going to stay here where it's safe. Alright, we're going to drop in some worms for them today and see who's hungry. Sometimes they inspect it, and other times they literally hit it so fast and run off with it that if you don't have an underwater camera, you can't even tell that it happened. So let's take a look underwater. He's debating on whether or not he wants the worm, and then he's committed. Now I gotta drop one in for Houdini. Got him. Alright, had lots of good news today. Now it's time for some sad news. We had one of our bass up here floating on the banks. Not sure what happened. There was like a half-eaten bluegill right in front of him. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with it or not. And so we're scanning him to see which one he is. And this fish is named Nemo. Sad to see you go, Nemo. We'd actually caught Nemo 5 times. And the one thing I did notice back in April when we caught Nemo was it had gotten really skinny, but it was probably just due to post-spawn because it recovered some of that weight back in June. Really hate to see that, but it is just one of those natural things that happens in ponds. Alright, now while we do some afternoon feeding right here in the 5-acre pond, I wanted to get some feedback from you guys on some upcoming projects that I have planned. So as we're starting to learn together, these bass require a massive amount of forage fish. And so one idea I had was to build some more hatchery ponds, maybe one for threadfin shad or golden shiners, another one for the prawns, and start growing more bait right here on the farm. And we're also starting to plan and design a bigger pond, even bigger than our 5-acre pond. We'll be taking a lot of the things that we learned from this project and applying them to that new pond, as well as some upgrades and different ideas. And then this fall, when the weather starts cooling off a little bit, we're also considering doing some traveling and targeting new species of fish to add to Cedar Falls. So we could potentially add a striped bass, smallmouth bass, spot, hybrid, alligator gar. There's a lot of cool fish out there that would make a good addition in that pond. So leave me a comment down below if there's any specific species you would like to see us catch. And like I said, even if I have to travel somewhere else to catch it, I think that'd be a good plan for this fall. And I'm also open to other ideas. If you'd like to see some other video topics that aren't related to ponds, leave those comments below too. Now let's check in on the prawn tank. You can see we got some big boys down in there. Man, that one's got some big eyeballs on him. You know when they start growing those pinchers out in front of them, that's when they're getting to that next level. And I'm also starting to think about isolating some of these guys and pulling them out of the tank, especially those bigger males, because they are carnivores and will start eating each other once they get big. And we're probably only a few weeks away from adding them to the 5-acre pond anyways. Alright, so what do we have going on here? Looks like we got Peter Rabbit and his girlfriend hanging out in the middle of the road, and a few doves down on the ground just past him. We got a big group of doves this year. A lot of them out there eating the millet and things that we planted out there in the fields. I hate to mess up a good party, but I gotta get out of here today. Man, that's a bunch of doves. So now let's take an overhead look at the pond and see what all the fishies are doing. You can see we got some tilapia hanging out here in the shallow parts. They're spawning every 21 days this time of year and have decimated all the algae in the pond, which is great. Here we got an overhead look at one of the fish feeders. I love it whenever they have a false alarm and they think the feeder's about to go off and they all come shooting up. And here we got a few largemouth cruising through the bluegill and tilapia beds. This time of year, they like to school up together, cruise the banks, and in the past, they've always picked the tilapia off first, which kind of seems to be what they're looking for here. So the bass have that darker look to them, the tilapia are the more albino or whitish look. Whatever that was, they got excited over it. And here's another really cool shot. So that's a bass coming through the tree. The darker one's the bass. The tilapia is the lighter one. You can also see the big white eyeballs. That's a dead giveaway. But that's a pretty decent sized bass right there. You can tell he's about 2 to 3 times the length of some of those bluegills. And you can see he's not really messing with them. He's cruising around looking for some of those smaller fish. And look at there, he just joined up with an even bigger bass. That one looks impressive. I don't think that one would have many issues eating any of those bluegills. You can tell it's feeding time. Everybody's coming up here in the shallow water. They know the pellets are about to start flying. We had another false alarm. And man, look at that. That is just wild how many fish come out of the deep end right when those feeders go off. And that's a lot of food that gets sent out. And they eat it within seconds. So we're getting all sort of vegetation and stuff growing on the pond's edge. The one thing we can't have is these little cattails that slip in here. They are hard to get rid of if they ever take over. But I think all the fish and birds and stuff are enjoying the rest of that. And the funny thing is, the cattails blend in with a lot of the other native grasses. Like all that's just native grass out here. That's a cattail. I can just recognize it because I've looked at them so long. But they're pretty easy to remove. Just grab them right at the base, pull up. You see that whole stem right there? It's a trunk line that's leading on, and another one's going to pop out. So if you get them while they're young, they're not that hard to remove. Alright folks, about to do a little fishing, and I'm going to be using the biggest bait I have in my tackle box today with the main goal of trying to catch those first generation bass. The oldest, biggest bass in the pond to see how big they've gotten. As always, we'll scan them after we caught it. It'll give us a unique number so we can look them up in the database. If they haven't been scanned before, we'll insert a pit tag. But the technique is extremely easy this time of year. I'm going to go around and fish those brush piles that I sank. A couple of them out deep, one out here right off the end of the dock. Guaranteed success with a big worm on a brush pile in the heat of the summer. Go. Got him. Good one. That's a big one. Nice. A big 12-inch worm. Nice bass on a big worm. Alright, this fish is 1571185. 2.29. Alright, this fish is named Guppy. Good relative weights, healthy fish. Got it. Still looking another decent one. Here we go. Alright, this fish is 570134. It weighs 2 pounds even. Alright, this fish is named Woolly Booger, and it has lost almost a quarter of a pound in the past 2 months. Not too concerning right now, but we will keep an eye on that one. Got him. Piled in right there off that little hump. Another good one. Loaded with 2-pounders. Biggest one of the day. Alright, this one's 570315. 2.18. And this fish is named Flash, and it's been over a year since we caught Flash, and that relative weight went up from 92% to 107. Off that treetop I just put down. A little on the skinny side. This one has not been caught before. Alright, he's going to be 233877 and weighs 1.63. Missed the first part of this cast. I just cast out and he hit it on the way down. Another one on the big worm. Nice one. This fish has not been caught. Wow. Alright, he's going to be 233747 and weighs 2.07 pounds. There we go. Right as it hit the bottom. Yes, sir. Well, they're stacked in there good. Both spots I picked today just loaded in. Got a jumper. All about the same size. No way, another one that has not been caught. Wow. Alright, he's going to be 5'6", 9709, and he weighs 2.02. Here we go. Got him. Right there off that treetop. If you sink one in deep water this time of year, no matter what body of water you're in, it's going to have fish on it. Smaller guy, maybe Gen 2. Alright, he is 232545. Weighs 1.65. And this fish is named Yogi, and I wasn't able to get a measurement on it either time I caught it. But we got some increase in weight, which is good. And I had some friends come into town, and we had some special guests, Ayla and Jax, get to come out and do a little fishing on the dock. It's always fun to watch kids catching these fish because that's really what it's all about. Ayla was excited with her big bass. And Jax wasn't going to be left out. He caught him a nice one too, and it had not been tagged yet, so we let him name it. And it's no surprise, this fish is now named Jax. Alright, time to feed the deer, and I'm going to be trying out a new product today called Everything But the Kitchen Sink. I love that name because it has oat, wheat, corn, barley, milo, peanuts, protein, cottonseed, roasted soybeans, sugar beets, and black oil sunflower seeds. Literally everything but the kitchen sink. We're going to pair that up with a similar product I know they like, this Grainiac block. Alright, we got a bachelor group of bucks coming in right at dark. Got some good growth on that one there in the back. Hopefully this protein's helping them out. That's the raccoon signal that we're out of food. Another group of bucks came through. Still in velvet and growing out. He's saying, how many times do I have to send the signal? More food. And now he's happy. We got him some more food out, and this should last him a little while. Got 2 bucks enjoying that mineral block. There's a good shot of the bucks crossing the creek to get out there to the half acre. And Mr. Raccoon hanging out down there. We actually have had a decent amount of rain, and the creeks are up and flooding a little bit. Look at there, a wily coyote coming through. That's why we put these swamp cams out, see if we can see a different variety of animals than what comes out there in the open field. But I can tell you the raccoons work harder than everybody else. They are on a constant mission for food. Look at them, even digging and checking up under the stumps. They work hard. Alright, down here at the half acre, and my buddy Nick has grown some sawtooth oak trees from an acorn. So he gave me a few of them to plant down here. You can see the white oak trees there and there are doing really good. So we're going to plant these, but I told him with them being this small, there's at least a 50-50 chance that the deer come and eat them because they've eaten the pines and all the apple and fruit trees that we put out. So let's see if the deer like munching on an oak tree or not. There we go, got it planted. We'll see how it does. Alright folks, that is going to wrap up this video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with the ponds, bass, and all the other wildlife out here at the farm. But I hope you all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.